Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. I'm Andia, a licensed addiction counselor, and along with my co-host, Laura Kissman, a quantum nutritionist, we will be inviting expert scientists, clinicians, survivors, and thrivers to distill their pearls of wisdom attained from applying quantum biology to their fields of research and everyday lives. Our goal is to bring you easy to understand principles and practices about the study of light, water, and magnetism so you can take your health into your own hands. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. I am a huge fan. We have Brian Johnson with us today, and he is the founder and CEO of Synergy 360. And he is a triple certified building biologist specializing in environmental impacts and building science. And he has over 25 years of in the building industry as a general contractor. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Oh, thank you, Andia. Thank you, Laura, for inviting me on. And today, you're right, it is a special day, not just because of that I'm on the podcast, because it's your birthday, Andia. So happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both. Well, this is the best birthday treat I could absolutely have. I tell you that. So let's start, Brian, with what led you down the path of healthy home building?
Yes, I'll definitely do my best to keep it short. Well, you like this because I started off in the lumber industry. That's where I started my career, and it was south of Portland, Oregon.
Oh,
And, I was a certified lumber grader. And so I used to grade a lot of framing lumber. Like I've graded millions of board feet of lumber and worked in that industry for almost 10 years. And I went right from that industry right into building. And back in 03 is when I got my contractor's license in California. And it was funny because, like when I worked in the lumber industry, I was like, yeah, I want to build homes, but I don't want to build with lumber. and it's funny because, fast forwarding, I find out all these different, mold, on lumber and things like that, right? And so, but it was funny, like in 03, 04, I went right into building homes, but it was concrete homes because I was always fascinated with concrete. And I got into what's referred to as ICF construction, and it's insulated concrete form. And it was like these big blocks, and you stack them and you fill them with concrete. And I mean, they were just like these bomb shelters of these homes, and they were super amazing, super energy efficient. And then just kind of fast forwarding since 03, I was, very big into like triathlons, Ironman, Xterra off-road events and things like that. So, I was really big into health and eating right. But also at the same time, in my construction company, I had different divisions, and I had a coatings division, and we worked with a lot of chemicals. And, so here I am, I'm competing, I'm pushing my body past the limits. And in late 30s, I started developing like serious like brain fog. Like it was really scary. And that's what led me down the route of like environmental medicine, functional, integrative approaches to understanding. Well, come to find out, like working with all of these. And I wasn't doing as much home building because I was doing other types of construction at that point later on in my late 30s. And when I was working with my doctors, I worked with a really well-known doctor, Ann Chippy, in Austin, Texas. And she's like a mold specialist. And she says, oh, this is interesting. She says, have you worked with a lot of mold, or do like, are you familiar with that? I'm like, yeah. I said, I work in all kinds of moldy homes. And she says, do you wear, personal protective equipment? And I was like, no, not really. I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it. But also too, she says, yeah, your toxicology reports off the charts too. Like, are you exposed to like, all these different chemicals? And I said, yeah, it's the core of what I do. So it's like, here I'm exposed to mold. I'm exposed to all these chemicals. I'm an Ironman. I'm pushing my body. So I was literally just pushing my body into the point of just complete exhaustion. I was just breaking the body down. And so it's like, here I'm this athlete, this person that's eating well, and so I had to go down the rabbit hole of that to understand like the deep aspects of just health. Mm-hmm. And through that whole experience, basically what I took out of it was like, well, how do we build homes that are like, free from mold, right? That are free from toxins, And of course, all these other things, EMFs and, air quality and all these types of things, because got really big into the biohacking world. And everyone's talking, oh, red light and circadian and, air filtration and all these different technologies. And I'm like, as a builder, it's my responsibility to be able to take all of this, put it all together, and really create building healthy homes. And so that's, sorry, it's a long story, but there was just a lot of history there that really kind of puts this together on the intention of what it took to really put Synergy 360 together to start healthy home building.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
so I know that you have some like pillars. So I want to just mention them now because we're going to be touching on them throughout this episode. So I know design, electrical, mechanical, lighting, water, and then non-toxic chemical or non-toxic materials.
Mhm.
So everyone listening, we are going to be touching on all of those things throughout this episode. And yeah, maybe since mold is a part of your story, we just start there. I don't know. Where do you think?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, definitely. Because also we were doing a lot of renovations, a lot of remodels and a lot of historic mid-century homes there in California. Matter of fact, I was working in Palm Springs. I worked in Palm Springs for over 20 years, or for about 20 years. And all these homes, it's crazy. Like Palm Springs sits on the edge of the Mojave Desert, right? Like,
Right.
there's kind of like this thing of, people are like, well, I'm going to move to Arizona because there's no mold there, or I'm going to be in a drier climate, there's no mold, and I, I've never saw so many moldy buildings in Palm Springs. And the reason why is because Palm Springs sits on a pretty large aquifer. And so that's why the golf courses, and it's green
Right.
and it's beautiful, right in the middle of this metropolis, in the middle of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because they overwater. So there's just water infiltrating through the homes and vapor emissions just coming up through the slabs. And it would get into the walls. And I mean, it was just so much black mold. And so that's really kind of where, one, I got my exposure, but at the same time, too, I'm like, well, if I was to build, I would not be building, lumber, because I'm familiar with grading lumber because we would deal with a lot of moldy lumber that was imported from Canada. Back then, I didn't really understand the mold other than it was pretty obvious that it was moldy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew that when I get back into building, I'm like, what is it going to be? If I use lumber, is it going to be mold resistant? How do I make it mold resistant? It needs to be breathable, it needs to have high permeability rates. So I still started really studying all the different types of construction materials and how I apply them through design. And so that's it's funny. It's like, here I go full circle right back to ICF construction. I'm like, in 2003, I was building, like mold resistant homes, not even realizing that I was building these like mold resistant homes. And so, like, kind of fast forwarding, like right now, when I work with architects and we're working with like design and we're working with building materials in the building envelope, a lot of the times, like, I'll specify like ICF construction for number one, but a non-toxic version of an ICF construction, or like rammed earth. Everybody's, seen, like, there's this hempcrete, like there's Adobe, there's other building systems too that I'm not so much as favor, but ICF, rammed earth, Adobe construction, hempcrete construction, these walls are solid cavity walls that go from anywhere between 12 inches to 24 inches thick. Imagine that, right? So there's nowhere for the mold to grow in between. So we've eliminated that whole aspect. And also too, because of the thermal protection, right? The acoustics, like you don't hear any outside noise. Again, it's non-toxic, and it allows us to create an environment that's much easier to control, which would lead me into like the mechanical systems. Is that okay to go right into the mechanical aspects? Any
Yeah.
questions on the building systems and mold?
Well, I was going to ask you if that's why you specialize in concrete because it's mold resistant.
Well,
And you kind of answered my question already. And
yeah.
there's a bunch of other ones too.
It was funny because it was total by accident too. Or was it? Right?
I have a question though, before you leave this, the whole idea of especially concrete. I was telling some family members that live in northern Alberta, they're
Mhm.
flying home today to minus 25 Celsius.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so And I was telling him about your home that I hope you're going to talk about this house that you built in Tucson at some point. Okay. But going back a memory, we were in Alabama for a year through my husband's Air Force job. And we had these sponsors, and one of the sponsors brought us to their home a few times, and it was a concrete home.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going, what the heck? This is so interesting. Why would, and I thought he had built it, to survive an atomic blast. I wasn't even thinking about mold. Question that I have, maybe you can comment on that, but the real question I have is, what about, what do you do? Like if someone's going to make a concrete home in -25 in Canada, like to me, that would be freezing cold home.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
how would you insulate that?
Yeah,
To me?
absolutely. There's multiple ways, but the simple one is the ICF construction that I was referring to earlier. So ICF stands for insulated concrete forms. So these forms, they're kind of like, imagine like a big cinder block, but the cinder block's made with like non-toxic materials. Actually, one of the systems I use is called Faswall, and I'm happy to share that to anybody if they want to, do, some research. It's FASWALL, Faswall, and they actually reclaim lumber, they grind it down, mineralize it, and they mold it into like these very large blocks. And what's cool about the system is it has inserts. It has mineral rock wool inserts that you drop into the cells of the block before you fill it with concrete. And so what that does is that increases the R value, the insulated.
Okay, that was the question.
Wall value. Yeah. Yeah. So like we can with that specific with Fastwall, I believe we can go up to we can go beyond an R32 wall.
Wow.
Which is great for the conditions that you're talking about. Like in the extreme, even here in the Mojave or the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, it's a great system to build with, or if you're up in Canada in the extreme cold conditions. So you actually brought up a good point on that too, because it's the thermal load. So when we're doing design for like mechanicals and the HVAC systems, which will tie this in now, right? We're modeling the load factors, right? So we're trying to model and build a home to where we're utilizing the natural resource, passive solar, gain types of things like that, because ICF walls and rammed earth walls and these other walls, they hold energy from the sun. And with these wall systems, of course, you can insulate them, Well, now we're talking about the load capacity inside, and the load is how many BTUs, how much energy is it going to take to heat or cool that space? Okay. This is a big piece. And this is the whole energy efficiency side of everything. And that's why they were building ICF mainly because of the energy efficiency side of it, right? But from a health perspective side of it, if we can come in there and reduce all the mechanical systems and the load systems, now we can design healthier systems. Like, for example, HVAC has an, typical centralized HVAC systems have an air handler, heats and cools the air, goes through the coils, and then it goes through the ducts and then feeds air throughout the house right? Yeah. Well, from a mold perspective or a dust perspective or an allergen or indoor air quality, those ducts get dirty, right? So if we can minimize the amount of ductwork by it, and of course I'm talking, if we're designing a new home, then we could start looking at radiant heated floor systems, great for Canada.
Yep.
Because, just with that alone, you're almost eliminating like a forced air, type system just with a radiant in it by itself. And also too, now like AC climate control systems have come so far. There's different types of these mini split systems now. Mini splits kind of get a bad name because it's kind of like, the big old head unit right on the wall that blows the hot and the cold air, right?
Yeah, I don't know what that is when you say
mini split, it's a very efficient way to heat and cool a space. And basically it's a small compact unit that you mount on the wall, and the condenser goes outside, and then it'll heat and cool that space, but it's not ventilation. So it's just, I'm going to talk about this here in a second. So the mini split, they come in different, they have them in minimal duct systems, they have them in ceiling cassette systems, they have them in the wall systems. And they've kind of got, in the EMR world, the electromagnetic EMF world, they kind of got a bad name because some of the earlier models, kind of like, this is where we'll start kind of molding things in together, because they were putting out like a lot of dirty electricity and DE, and and from an EMF perspective. But it's come a long ways. We can filter that. And so, believe it or not, any way, and I don't want to be all favorable about in our podcast here about mini splits. However, we could use mini split type systems on a minimal load capacity. Like, so if we're designing and we're building a home out of concrete or the rammed earth, we don't have to have the same requirement that a standard 2x6 lumber framed home would need. So we're cutting down all these mechanical systems substantially.
That's
now
amazing.
Yeah. Now, if we start designing a lot, we're starting to put, we all want our windows, right? But if we were to hire a mechanical engineer and say, hey, we want you to build us like the most energy efficient, least amount of load cal home, there wouldn't be any windows. It would just be, just walls. So,
I married a mechanical engineer, and he's always like, blinds down, windows closed. I'm not allowed to open windows. And I'm like, but hang on, from a quantum biology perspective, we need the light. And
this is perfect. Yeah.
Now I understand why.
Yeah. No, this is great. Yeah. So that for the load capacity, right? And so when you're working with an architect, it's good to model the home, because that's what they'll do. They'll model things out, from an energy perspective, have plenty of overhang, so design of, not only from the design of, decreasing all the load for all the mechanicals too, but also to have a sustainable, so now we're talking about building healthy homes here, right? The whole terminology for green, for sustainability, eco-friendly, there's a lot of greenwashing in that, right? Or maybe their agenda is for recycled materials and to, reduce the carbon footprint. And I get it, and I understand that, but it doesn't mean that it's geared around health. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when we're designing homes, we're talking about building, healthy homes that are going to be, so now when I use the terminology sustainable, for me, sustainable is building a home that's going to last hundreds of years, right? It's going to be multi-generational. It's going to be for, your grandkids to even live in, and so doing that design, there's a lot to consider in the design. So like big overhangs, protecting the windows, because windows is kind of usually the first line of defense that gets hammered by the elements, the exposures to these windows. So yeah, so again, I'm kind of back into the design aspect, but the design affects everything.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question about the windows. Do you use quartz glass for the windows, because that would allow, full spectrum light in, or from the energy's perspective of, like just yes or no?
No. It would be cool to do that. But depending on like the region, of where you're at in the country, there's a lot of things that we have to follow, with codes and things like that for regions, for obvious reasons, for thermal value and insulation and things like that. Like,
okay, that was
double
my question.
pane, triple pane, they all have to be, they're filled with a gas, and so they're what we refer to as like a low E window, so when you're doing a lot of design like that, you have to kind of stick with a guideline of what types of windows that you're using.
Okay.
And
then
not to say that you can go off and do your own thing with some quartz glass, but
yeah. Well, it's mentioned a lot in this space, so I thought I would ask the question. But you also
I'd like to see a solution for that. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned flooring, and we know that we can ground in concrete, right? So I'm wondering if these concrete homes, like when you're walking around your home, are you connected to the earth? Are you grounded?
Yeah. There's so when we're, especially rammed earth home or rammed earth, hempcrete, adobe, those more so, because you're building it with earth.
Right.
I mean, it's the whole resonance and the frequency of earth, right? And then it's connected to the earth, right? So like the walls themselves become grounding. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Which ties into a piece of negative ions versus positive ion, right? You know,
Preaching to the choir here.
yeah. It's a fascinating subject. Matter of fact, I have like thousands of dollars in equipment that measures ions, and I test a lot of building materials. You know, so obviously synthetic building materials, or if there's a lot of friction, you know, from air movement through plenums and HVAC systems, air handling systems, they produce high, you know, positive ion. They put out positive ions, right? And so now you're in this environment that has all these synthetic environments and or materials and carpeting and air movement, you know, just synthetic materials. You just now you're in like this high positive environment, you know, positive ions versus like the negative ions. So that would be grounding, right? Grounding, being out in nature, waterfalls, lakes, oceans, you know.
Yeah.
And
It sounds to
so
me that's what you're doing when you're building these homes. You're bringing nature into the home, like
I
with the
you know,
builds.
I use nature as the gold standard for sure. It's usually kind of in the beginning, like I'll share, I'm like, nature is the gold standard for building. And so what can we do to, which kind of brings into the whole glass piece, because I want to talk about natural light, because it's like, what can we do to build an environment like that's like if you're in nature, right? That's, I think that personally, that's the goal. How can we build an environment where we could just stay in that environment, yet we're protected from certain things of nature, right? They call it, they refer the home as like the third layer of the skin. We have our skin, we have our clothing, and then we have the home, which is, you know, Paula Baker Laporte and the prescription for a healthy house. By the way, this could be for all your listeners here. We can talk about this at the end. Paula Baker Laporte. This is
Yeah.
Okay.
this is like 35 plus years of just knowledge from an architect that builds eco dwellings and eco homes.
Awesome. I didn't know about that book.
Yeah, this is kind of like I reference this book all the time. Like if our audience here was to read and like just breathe this book, they could just hire an architect, hire a contractor, and if they were to follow the guidelines in this book, it'll tell them every step by step on how to build a healthy home. It's right here in this book.
Awesome.
But
So
where
our
was it?
husbands are getting this for Christmas, or?
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Where was I going before I brought
I've
eco?
got questions on mold.
Yeah.
If you need to.
Well,
Okay.
there. Oh, darn it!
Oh,
There
you were
was.
talking about.
Oh,
You said you
so
wanted
yeah,
to
just
touch on
you
lighting.
know, it's building
Like,
natural materials and just using nature as a
yes,
goal. You know, the home should
exactly.
become the sanctuary, right, to protect us. The third layer of skin, and we'll go back to your question. Sorry, I just want to finish
No,
that
no,
out.
that's so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just you know, so how do we create all that natural environment? You know, the negative ions of the grounding, the experience, walking on, you know, doing the flooring. You know, by the
Yeah.
way, concrete. We do a lot of concrete flooring in a lot of our homes too as well. You can do other types of systems, but like we polish the like my ideal home is radiant floors, polished concrete, and so you're grounding on the concrete floors that are heating or cooling the space, you know, depending, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Natural lighting. We'll go back into lighting, but let's answer the questions around the mold.
No, well, you answered one of them just by saying that. The things I wanted to make sure in the mold category that we can consider out in a in a healthy home would be, so no drywall. Is that the idea? Because it's
Not
mold.
necessarily. I do so. By the way, I do a lot of designs and specifications. That's what I do now. So I'm currently not building at the moment because I'm out managing and doing design and specifications with architects.
Mhm.
And drywall is a big one. And so I've actually become more of a researcher in the last 4 years than almost anything because it's my job to make sure that I research everything that I do. There's extensive research that I do, and every building, you know, there's 8,000 different building components out there. So you can imagine the amount of work that it takes. But drywall, you know, is a big one. And there's several companies out there that put out products that are drywall that are paperless. So paperless is kind of like the big one that's talked about in the healthy building industry because you're getting rid of the cellulose. So if that, which is the paper side, cellulose is the food. So if you get water in the right temperature and humidity to the paper, that's the first place that the mold's going to grow on. And so now we have paperless drywall or fiberglass back drywall. They have drywall now where the gypsum, they're not using any like biocides and, you know, like, so it's like a non-toxic drywall. And these are readily available too, by the way. I mean, they're used in the commercial industry. And that's a lot of the design and specifications that I put together. These are materials that are used in commercial, but they don't use them in residential. And I'm like, why? So that was kind of like my epiphany when I was like, wait a minute, like there's all these lighting systems, there's these mechanical systems, there's electrical systems. They're using it in commercial all day long, you know, for public safety, and in their codes are just completely different, you know, for commercial, but it meets at a healthy level of what we're trying to create. So that's what I did, is I adopted a lot of the commercial type materials and I brought them into the residential. I started that 4 years ago. Now it's crazy. Now you see all these manufacturers, they're actually promoting these materials for residential now. So like, yeah, so around like mold. So that's, but also too, a lot of that, you know, talking about like, you know, like say if it's in a shower area, or, you know, it's a wall that, you know, maybe there was a window that got some water penetration through the window, or, you know, water just came in through the exterior wall and now you got mold growing in the drywall. When I look at designing a home, we're looking at building a home that's breathable. Okay. So if we were to design a 2x6 framed home, you know, we wouldn't deal with these issues on a mass wall. But if we were to build a you know, like a lumber framed home, we would want to build a home that has materials that have high permeability and that are breathable. So if water was to get in, it can breathe and it can release. So that's a lot of the things that I do when I'm doing the design. So not only are we looking at materials that are, you know, mold resistant, you know, or, you know, that have natural properties of antimicrobials, not because we got to be careful. And we'll talk about like toxic materials, but, you know, they'll put a lot of these antimicrobials into these materials. Well, they have biocides and they have toxins in them. So we're trying to look at using materials that don't have all these, you know, antimicrobials, natural antimicrobials, just by default of what the product is, right? So we want to use products that have high permeability rate, that are breathable, and that have the least amount of materials that are going to grow mold. And that's real common, you know, for a, you know, typical lumber framed home. That's, you know, somebody has water damage, it wasn't caught, and there's a mold issue. It's growing on the lumber, it's growing on the drywall, it's growing on a paper source, you know, things like, or, you know, like even like insulation, kind of top on insulation real quick, you know. So now we're using a lot of insulation that's paperless again. So we're eliminating the food source there. We're using materials. Havelock wool is kind of a big one out there. It's a big name, but it's the lamb's wool, you know, or the sheep's wool insulation, because it has natural antimicrobial properties already in it. It's bug resistant, it's mold resistant, right? Mineral rock wool is another one. And so that's the insulation in the wall. So now here we're selecting these non-toxic building materials that aren't affected by all these other factors, but also too, if they were to become saturated with water, at least if you were to, you know, have a flood or something major was to happen, it buys you more time to be able to open up the walls to like remediate and take care of it without already having like an instant mold problem. You know, usually typically like if it was a flood or a burst of a pipe and it's caught within that first 24 to 48 hours, you know, that's not typically the issue, because you can get on it, you can remediate, you can you know, dehumid the area, you know, but it's the slow drips that people don't see over years and years and years. That's what leads to the toxic mold issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
You answered one of my questions, because I wanted to point out, you know, when we're trying to avoid toxins, and then sometimes people are building they're making a product like mold resistant materials or whatever,
Yep.
but those materials are literally made out of toxic things themselves. So I love
Yes.
that you really, I mean, hence the 360 in your brand, right? You really look at the whole thing, and you research all options. I love that about you, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Even myself, like when I started to adopt all these different practices, like, oh, okay, hey, I'm going to build a mold resistant home and I'm going to encapsulate my lumber, using, antimicrobials, but once I started learning, I mean, it's a learning curve for everybody, and
Yeah.
that's why I had to go out. I had to proactively go out and build and do the things on my own dime. And if I had an idea, I had to do it on my own. I didn't want my clients to be the guinea pigs of something,
Right.
And so but early on, understanding these antimicrobials that come into, so here I think I'm doing this like mildew resistant, sealants and things like that, non-VOC. It's like, oh, once you start looking at the toxins that are in these antimicrobials, I'm like, yeah, okay, so it's but you have to like read the labels. We know about reading labels for our food and buying organic and
Yep.
seeing what's hidden in the foods and the seed oils and all these different things, right? Imagine what that looks like in the building industry. And they
Yeah.
make it so complex. Everything's proprietary. Then you have to look. Yeah, you have to look. You can, if you do keep digging, you'll find things. But now it's become a lot more transparent. There's cradle to cradle, and there's all these different, all these certification programs out there, right?
Mhm.
That you can, look up. But you have to do your research. But now you can
Right.
pretty much find the information out there if there's like hidden toxins and things like that in the building materials. So yeah, so speaking of like the building materials, right? That's another big piece of this puzzle, right? So when again back to the specification and design, it's understanding these types of building materials. So we talked about the drywall, we talked about the insulation. What's another thing? Paints, sealers, adhesives, glues.
Carpeting,
What's that?
carpeting or
Oh,
no
carpeting.
carpeting?
Yeah, carpeting. Carpeting is, yeah, that's just a big no for a healthy home build. But and
Thanks for
you
helping.
know, yeah, that's a hard no for me, just
Yeah.
for the audience. And the reason why is, you can get into like the synth or the natural, wool. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's some really cool, carpeting out there. But the other aspect that you want to look at for carpeting, it's so hard to clean. And this kind of ties into a really important piece of, what we're walking around, what we're exposed to outside that, right? The outside the home, we can build a healthy home and make it healthy and super clean all we want. But if we're tracking, all of this, imagine the heavy metals that, the barium and the aluminum and the biocides and the fungicides and everything that we're walking into parks that are treated with chemicals and, everything, right? So the one place that we're walking, if we're not taking our shoes off, I always recommend, it's always a good practice to take your shoes off, and have like, harder surfaces of floors that are easier to clean and have a good cleaning program with a good HEPA vacuum and wiping everything down. So can you imagine if we had carpet? It can be 100% organic, no problem. But can you imagine if you're walking your shoes in that carpet? It's almost near impossible to clean,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
all the spores, the dust, the pollen, everything just migrates into the carpeting. It's almost impossible to clean out. So that's why that's actually like the biggest no for me of
Yeah.
carpeting. It's for that reason.
Well,
Which
and they say for like air quality too, like always to be vacuuming, and you've just mentioned vacuuming. What is your recommended vacuum, Brian?
oh,
To to to
oh
to,
gosh.
to mitigate some of this
Yes.
stuff. Because people,
Not
like, I have carpeting in two of these rooms. There's no carpeting in my whole house except two rooms. And I know I try to keep them vacuumed as much as possible because I know that helps with the air. But you're right, they are a nuisance. And I want to remove them as soon as I can, but I can't right now. So what would I do?
yeah, just to keep it simplified. I mean, you could be going on Amazon and ultimately you want what's HEPA, HEPA, filtration. And you can buy certified HEPA vacuums. They're out there. What is that one company? I always forget the name. It's a European. Is it Miley?
I have it. Mealy.
The Mealy? Thank you.
Mealy.
You have
Yes,
that? Do you have that vacuum?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's nice
yeah.
and quiet too.
So the Mealy has a
Miele for
yeah
Indian.
yeah, and they have a HEPA. That's a HEPA filter in that vacuum. And there's other, companies out there that have HEPA filters in their vacuum cleaners. And so that's really, really important, because that way, when you're vacuuming everything, at least you're containing that. So then when you have the dust, so keep in mind, you have all that dust and mold, spores and everything. You want to make sure that you empty that thing like outside and like in the trash can and like wash it down and like all that, because you just don't want to be like, okay, well, I just cleaned everything. And then you open up the kitchen, the trash can, and you're opening up the filter and dust is going all over, because the whole goal is, and it's not from a place of, I'm just sharing this as good practice. Like home, we can spend all this money and build the healthiest home using all these non-toxic building materials, not using carpeting, doing all these things that we're talking about so far. And if we're not cleaning the environment, you're just exposing that environment to the same thing again. It really is, from an indoor air quality, and we can kind of segue into indoor air quality as well.
One thing before we leave, because it kind of touches on what you just said, if we don't clean our home, like of things as well, like in terms of having it cluttered. I was going back to your thought about how the home is the third skin and how it has to breathe. And I was thinking, what about the breath inside the home? Like, how it's so important to almost be a minimalist a little bit. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm working on it, but just so is decluttering a high priority for you?
Well, personally, me, I'm like very into feng shui and clean spaces and things like that. So I'm a minimalist. I know we're not all minimalists, but it pays off being a minimalist, because now I'm like, oh, things are just easier to clean. There's a little more, kind of, it's just easier just to, keep track of things and clean things. And not that I'm a clean freak or anything like that. I just know that what I know now, in building, renovating. And by the way, for our audience here, everything that we're talking about, yeah, we're talking new design and we're talking ICF and concrete homes and things like this. But that doesn't mean that we can't take an existing environment, and make it a healthy environment too, as well. So I really want to just drive that home, because I don't want to build this whole thing. Oh, that's nice podcast here, but I don't have the money to build or whatever, design a new home, or we have our home and this is what we want. So everything that I'm sharing, from again certain types of things. But if we're doing renovating, we can upgrade the air filtration and the air handling systems. We can bring in, wherever we renovate, we could use non-toxic building materials. We can use low EMF building practices for the electrical systems, all these different types of things. So we can upgrade different environments as well, and come up with good cleaning practices. I work with a company, Home Cleanse, and Home Cleanse does an amazing job. They're a remediation company. They're national. They work nationwide doing mold remediation and fine particle cleaning. And fine particle cleaning, this kind of ties the piece into the cleaning aspect, because even building a home, when we're building a home, like all the mold spores they're traveling and they're on building materials, and people are walking them in through when you're commissioning that home, it's not like, even though we built this mold-free environment using all these materials, it's not like that area is mold-free. Like if we were to do an ERMI test or a MSQ PCR test, more than likely it's going to come back elevated because of just the materials and the exposure and things like that. But once we clean that environment, what we refer to as an environmental fine particle cleaning, now we know there's nothing. It's been completely cleaned out, And also too, when we're doing renovations and construction, I work with a lot of general contractors, and at first they're kind of like, a little skeptical, but I'm like, hey, you guys need to purchase a HEPA vacuum. And that HEPA vacuum, like every day we need to hire somebody, just like inexpensive labor, somebody that all they have to do is vacuum, and that job site gets cleaned all the time, right? Because we don't want to be like putting all kinds of wood shavings in the walls and buttoning these walls up and things like that, right? So that's
of everything. That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, like, and so again, it doesn't have to be a thing, right? It doesn't have to be a big deal because, contractors are like, what, you kidding me? Like, we're building a 10,000 square foot home and I'm going to have to vacuum everything every day, whatever. It's like, once you create like a good cleaning practice for the construction, it's just that the end result is then when we come in to do the cleaning, we just know that everything's clean throughout, inside the walls, in the attics and everything like that. So
Yeah.
it's a good practice. So cleaning's a big one.
You
Ryan,
just mentioned a couple tests. People won't know what that is.
Oh yeah,
I
sorry.
know you say the gold standard for mold testing is the ERMI test, ERMI, and you mentioned another test. What was that for?
Oh, it was the MSQ PCR is an ERMI test, but mold testing, like if I was to go in to do an assessment, and by the way, I'm a certified mold inspector too, but it's not like I don't specialize just in that. I do it as part of my assessments. But when I go in to do testing, mold testing in an environment, I use standard air. It's pretty common air collection, air cassette sampling. So there's an air pump and it measures, if there's spores that are active in the air, it'll pull them out. So I'll do air spore sampling through the house, and then I'll use ERMI. ERMI's really tricky. It's a tricky test because it will find anything and everything. And so I use ERMI as a piece of a puzzle to something. Was the environment never clean? Was there mold? Was there, a remediation job 10 years prior that maybe it wasn't remediated properly, or maybe it wasn't cleaned, So I'll use ERMI very strategic. They're expensive too. And so I'll use an ERMI test very strategically to help put a picture together. So a lot of the times, if somebody just grabs and does an ERMI test randomly, not really knowing the history of the building, not knowing the condition of the building, it can kind of lead people down kind of rabbit holes. You have to really understand. So when you're working, with a mold specialist, that's just one piece of a puzzle. They should be doing a physical inspection, and then they should be doing different types of testing, which, they're ultimately at the end, it's the mycotoxins and it's the endotoxins, right? That mold is creating, we're having a direct effect on our health, right? And so, that's part of the piece too. Like they'll be testing for mycotoxins, they'll be testing for this is more advanced mold testing, just to know, hey, was it bacteria? Was it gram negative? Like what was it? Was it water damage? And so was it mold? Was it bacteria? And things like that, right? And so testing, yeah, you have to work with somebody that's really advanced in environmental, like working with an environmental specialist is really important. And I understand all those aspects. And so when I do my assessments, again, I'm doing certain tests because I know exactly what it is I'm doing a full analysis of the building, right? I'm looking up in the attic, I'm looking in the walls, I'm looking around the windows, the foundations, the grade, because I want to rule out, and then of course I want to know what the building history is. So I want to rule all these factors out. So then when I'm testing, then I know maybe it was just something, it was an isolated incident. Maybe it just wasn't clean. Maybe it was walked in from outside, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
it sounds so much like a human. How we test for negative, gram bacteria and endotoxins, and it's like you're treating the home like a human. It
that's
comes
how
in professional medicine. Yeah, it's cool.
and that's how it should be. It really is. Just so we're aware. Again, this isn't, to scare people or anything. This is just to educate, to know that these things are out here and this is why we do it.
We probably should move along to electrical. Would love to see, I would love to hear you talk about non-native electromagnetic frequencies. I'm probably the people that you curse. I'm one of these EMF experts who's not I'm not building biology institute trained. I would love to be. It's just time and money, I guess. But I'm one of those people that will I actually go to my clients' homes and I test. I got a number of different meters. So I could have like a full podcast on this, just because I would love to pick your brain, because you're actually in the field doing it with all the knowledge, right? And the training. But can you tell us about the electrical in the home and things that you do test for when you're testing a home, but also when you're the things you consider when you build a home to keep it lower with non-native electromagnetic frequencies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. EMF. You know, when I started, it was kind of like, oh, what's this EMF's about, right? You know, and it was kind of merging, you know, into the science of, you know, health and like, okay, what's this that we're dealing with? And it's funny, Building Biology Institute, by the way, I was pretty far advanced in understanding just building mechanics and science, but building biology really helped. It kind of took me full circle back to everything again, but to really go and understand what it is. Once it all just clicked, I'm like, oh, okay, like, all right, look, we just need to design the homes and then we don't have to have or remodel or renovate, and we don't have to deal with all these EMF issues. Okay. But just real quick. So there's 4 types of EMFs. I explained this. We have electrical fields, and that's the 60 hertz or whatever, you know, hertz cycle, depending on what part of the world that you're in, you know, that brings the electrons flowing through the electrical system, like plumbing, into the home. And then by the default of the electrical fields is AC magnetic fields. So that's just something that happens, right? And through electrical movement of a line. And then we have radio frequencies, which is the non-ionizing, you know, radiation of just radio from, you know, wireless, cellular, Wi-Fi routers, cellular towers, microwaves, cellular
Bluetooth?
phones, you know,
Bluetooth?
Bluetooth, wireless phones, Wi-Fi systems, right? And we got to remember, like, we can turn it off at the source, but now we have all this smart technology that's also looking for that technology too, right? So RF, you know, radar, you know, anything radio. And then we have dirty electricity. It's referred to as MEP, EMI, but we refer to it a lot as just a simple term as dirty electricity. That's put out by like the inverters for like photovoltaic panels, you know, for, you know, solar, a lot of modern equipment in the home, mostly inverters or power supplies, but also dimmers. Any mechanical piece in the home typically will put out a form of dirty electricity. So I like to break everything down into those 4 categories, or 4 categories. And then when I'm doing like for example, if I'm going to do an assessment, the first thing I want to look at is like the location of the home, right? Like where's the cell towers in relation, you know, power lines, you know, they can even be underground too and put out high AC magnetic. So typically power lines, they'll put out very high AC magnetic fields. And that's the silent killer. That's the deadly one of all of the EMFs that I talked about. And so that's why we don't see homes being built under a power line, even though they're built a little too close, in my opinion, to these power lines. We have different types. We have transformer lines. We have distribution lines. You have all the different types of power lines, and they put out different levels. Okay. And so I'm looking at the outside environment first, and then we're measuring and we're capturing the data, right? Using all the fancy gauges and instruments and meters and things like that. But then I go into the home, and then of course, because once I've eliminated the external environment, then we can focus on the internal environment. And so typically I'm going to use like an existing home as an example. And it could, you know, especially if it's an older home, through the years, say there was renovations, remodels, you know, there was, you know, or maybe it was just never wired properly or whatever. From an electrical standpoint, what we see in the homes on older homes is typically like an AC magnetic issue, because just the way that it was wired, you know, circuits weren't wired properly. They were sharing neutrals, and I won't get too far into it, but what happens is if it's not wired properly, then, or if it's not grounded properly, there's all these types of things. It can create a lot of issues from the electrical and magnetic standpoint. So that kind of eliminates that. So we can go in there and correct issues pretty easily, you know, with our meters and different testing equipment. I can bring in any kind of an electrician. The electrician doesn't even need to understand even what building biology is. But if you have like a building biologist or somebody that understands electrical systems and knows that we're looking for, we can tell the electrician, hey, this circuit's creating this and da 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 da. Oh yeah, no problem. All I got to do is, you just direct them and they'll correct the problem, right? In new construction, it's really simple. When we're designing from, again, when I'm talking electrical field and AC magnetic fields, we're just designing a home. We're putting all of the, the main, or the main panel, the meters, everything coming to the home. We're putting them like in a mechanical room or in the garage, away from sleeping areas. We're dedicating the circuits. We're using more advanced arc fault circuit protectors, just to make sure if there was an AC magnetic, or if there was a wiring issue, it would trip the breaker like it's supposed to. So there's a lot of things from the electrical side that we can just build into the design and correct. Not a problem. That's so straightforward. It doesn't have to even be a thing. It's knowing in the design, working with a building biologist, building scientist, or somebody like myself, to understand when we are designing the electrical, that we're working with an architect, or we're renovating a home, that we're taking these practices and putting them into play. Okay, so now we'll go into radio frequencies. Again, for cellular data, Wi-Fi routers in the home, now we got smart home technology. We have all these smart appliances that are putting out Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. At first I called them dumb homes because everyone's called a smart home, but I was like, well, I don't, we got to put a better spin on this. So beyond smart, whatever we want to call it now. Right. So we're finding, basically, it's before wireless. What did we do? We hardwired everything. And we had some really cool technology, late 90s, mid 2000s, really when Ethernet really started coming, beyond dial up, and we started getting into DSL and where we're at in high speed internets now, we went wireless. And so I'm going right back to hardwire. So I hardwire everything. So my whole home, the whole infrastructure is done on Ethernet cabling. It's a low voltage line. There's no electrical issues coming through that line. And also too, we're hardwiring all of our technology. So even like TVs, anything that requires some kind of a data, cameras for security systems. Oh my God, the list goes on doorbells. So I do not use anything wireless, or if I do, if it is wireless, it has the capability to turn it off and on, just depending on what the client wants. But first line of defense is everything's hardwired 100%. So if the client, right, wants to, we'll still put a wireless. Now, by the way, we still do, for convenience and certain things, we'll still put, wireless systems in, but we'll use like a low emission type router. We'll put them on kill switches. That way, during the night, maybe the client's like, hey, I want to turn off all wireless. We can literally just turn it off a switch, everything's shut off through the house. However, we're still 100% hardwired. So the cameras are working, the doorbells are working, security's working. So people can have that peace of mind. Hey, I still have all my technology, the modern technology. And of course, too, and I've done a lot of testing around this. Sorry, I'll try to keep this as fast as I can.
Oh, this is interesting though. It's all
yeah.
good.
So I've tested, because, again, we're building all these low EMF homes, and Faraday cage homes and all these different types of things. But yet everyone's still, using their phone on the inside of the home, and which actually can kind of turn it into a microwave too, because now the phone's working harder. It's trying to find a signal. Now it's bouncing all these microwaves all throughout the house, right? So we've done different testing where we've taken routers, wireless routers, through, your Ethernet, your cable connection coming into your house, and we'll turn those down to a low emission, and we'll put the phone on Wi-Fi, but turn off the cellular side. And we've tested it versus the phone, Wi-Fi being off, cellular being on. We've tested them both ways, and you're way less radio frequency by having a low emission router with your phone just turned on to the wireless, believe it or not. So I'm not pushing that here. I'm just explaining. I've done a lot of different research. Now, if we are going to be 100% hardwired, and somebody's dedicated, like, no, like it's a hard no, I'm going to be hardwired. Well, they make all kinds of USB-C and different connectors to go to Ethernet for our phones or iPads or Android equipment and things like that, right? So we can be 100% hardwired. It's not a problem.
You could just plug in your phone throughout the house, right? Like,
right, yeah. So
in the kitchen,
like,
you plug it in and use it.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so if you design the home with enough Ethernet, like in the kitchen, you could have an Ethernet plug-in, or at the bar, or in the living room, in the bedrooms, you can have multiples, right? Like if you don't want long cords going all throughout the house, right? So you could just, kind of like back in the even Star Trek, you go in there and whoop, they would plug in, like upload all the data and stuff like that, right? So it's it's
Right.
it's it's exactly like that. Or you could also have the modern convenience of, yeah, you know what? I'm cool during the day, during my networking. I know that I have a router and it's a lower emission, so it's not putting out massive amounts of, non-ionizing radiation. Then you can still have all your wireless technology during the day and just shut it off at night. Okay. There's a lot to that, and I'll just kind of leave it right there. But yeah, we can design anything how anybody wants it. Okay. And it's really simple. It's kind of going back to the basics. So it's not like we're trying to recreate anything here. Okay.
Okay.
But
Geopathic, just on, do you test for that with dosing rods? That's the other.
well, I don't myself, so I noticed Andia wearing a biogeometry pendant over there. Yeah, like
I
I love
am.
bio. Yes,
This was
man.
my birthday present to myself, Brian, actually.
Oh, was
Ah,
it? Oh, I
happy
love it.
birthday.
Mine doesn't look like that anymore. It's more, but if I clean it, it'll look like that again. they
Funny.
they kind of tarnish a little bit, but yeah, no, biogeometry is awesome. And like I'll work with like biogeometrists to come out to measure, like, so if I'm working with a client and they really want to go all out and just cover everything on the land, I always recommend a biogeometrist to come out and do a survey, check for geopathic stressors. So that, yeah, no, we didn't talk about that, but that is a piece that, and especially if you're sensitive too, right? The DC magnetics from the Earth, that can kind of play a contributing factor. So the simple thing is, I learned this in the Building Biology Institute, but there was all these studies done in the early time, the Romans and all that, like, right? Like if they would have all their cattle and their pastures, and if the cattle and the animals, wouldn't migrate in certain areas, they didn't build in those areas because, the animals can sense these geopathic stressors, right? And then also to like foliage, plants, sometimes that's an indication that there's some abnormality about that area, but today we have, well, I mean, I'm sure this is thousands of years old, but people use dowsing rods or different biogeometry practices to measure these things. So yeah, that's a piece for
It's a
sure.
piece. Okay. I just
Yeah.
wondered if that was part of
Yeah.
what you did. Okay.
Yeah. No, we'll kind of come back to that as we kind of close up too, as far as biogeometry and understanding all these, biofields and things like that. But and
Oh,
then
and
go ahead.
paint? Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
so back to the non-toxic materials. Yeah, paint, that being one of them. So when we're doing the design specifications,
like
researching all.
EMF paint, or
Oh,
you?
sorry. Yeah, the EMF paint. Yeah, so the EMF paint, I don't do a lot of it, but for renovations, okay, thank you. So say for example, I'm doing all these measurements, external, there's a cell tower next door.
Yes,
There's
exactly.
something we can't do about it. On the inside, typically, we'll measure the fields on the inside. We'll shut all the wireless technologies, and then we'll find out what's the infiltration, what's the penetration, because they'll go right through like a 2x6, constructed wall, go right through it. If it's a low-E window, it won't. Low-E windows they'll actually block it. Okay. By the way, rammed earth, ICF, stops RF in its tracks. That's another reason why I build mass wall construction. Yeah, so the whole tiny home thing, Andy, we were kind of talking about. So they're typically thinner walls, and so like my way when I'm designing, I'm like, I want to build a structure that I know I'm blocking and protecting myself from, the external environments. Okay, but back to the shielded paint. So if we have, it's a little more complex, but you can use these graphene, graphite paints that will stop, just like the low E glass will stop the RF frequency from coming through the window. The paints do the same thing. That's their job. There's Y-Therm, Y-Shield. That's one of the big manufacturers out there. I've done several projects with great success, but you have to make sure that you're getting, the ceilings and the walls, because they can, the signals you can block it through the wall, but still it's going to become an overhead too, right? So you have to really make sure that you get everything sealed properly. You could do just bedrooms. You don't have to do the whole house.
Right. And then
But
you just don't bring your cell phone in that bedroom, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, yeah, which we shouldn't be anyways, right?
No, you're
Right.
microwaving
You
yourself.
know, or it should be on like airplane mode or something. Which also too, real quick, I like to share this with the audience. It's just a quick takeaway. So we talked about electrical fields, and there's one last thing I want to talk about as far as like DE goes, dirty electricity. But back to electrical, if think about this, in our bedroom, we have these courtesy outlets, for plugging in our vacuum or lamps and, things like that around our bedroom, right? All the walls. And then, and I'm just going to paint this picture because I feel like our audience probably has like wooden bed frames, but I'm just painting a picture here. So imagine we conduct 80% energy, right? We're energy beings. And if we're around an electrical source, we're going to absorb that energy. So imagine if you're sleeping right next to an outlet and there's energy flowing through there. If we were to take our meters and measure, and not that it's dangerous or anything, but can you imagine if we were sleeping and our heads are next to that outlet all night? Like, do you think we're really getting good quality sleep? No, because we're being exposed to this frenetic energy that's, again, 60 hertz, not demonizing it. It's what we need to power the homes, but you don't want to sleep next to it. And so our bodies are absorbing the energy. Our bed, if you have a metal bed frame with metal bed springs, that's absorbing energy. And this is just a takeaway for the audience, so either A, pull your bed away from the wall, but if you don't, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. B, you could shut the circuit breaker off to the room. So that way you're not exposed to this electrical field because you're absorbing that energy, right? Especially if there's an AC magnetic issue on top of that, in the home. Or C, you can buy these, I forgot what it's called now. It's basically a disconnect. It's a kill switch.
Kill switch?
Yeah. So yeah, you can wire the kill switch into the breaker panel, like an electrician can do it pretty easily. And then it just uses a little IR remote. And then you could actually turn the power off to the bedroom.
Nice.
That way. So when I'm designing my homes, two ways. Either A, I use MC cable, which is an expensive electrical cable. But what it does is it shields all the AC magnetics and electrical fields. And if there was dirty electricity, it really suppresses a lot of that interference. Or you can put a kill switch. Like if you're designing the room, you could just have an extra switch. So the power coming into that room, you just hit the kill switch and then all the power's off.
Nice.
And then of course, today with this amazing technology that's coming out through integration, and it's kind of ties in, we'll say this maybe at the end, low voltage if we have time. I know this is a lot, but anyways, now these, they call them smart panels. I don't like to use the word smart because we know smart's usually wireless technology involved, right? But these new smart panels, what they do is they sense if there's any voltage going to a room, say you plug your lamp in, it'll sense the voltage and it'll open up the circuit. But if you turn that lamp off, it kills the power to the circuit. That's the newest technology with electrical systems. It is advanced so much now. It's crazy. And a lot of people don't even understand it. They're like, they don't even know that it exists. And it's right there. Like, any electrician that understands like low voltage, if we're to design, it's so simple. You can just build that right into the design. So just kind of sharing some little takeaways that distance is our friend. Again, kind of like nature's the gold standard, but distance is our friend. So we don't want to be right next to power lines, right? We don't want to be right next to the outlet of the wall. We don't want to constantly have the Wi-Fi wireless systems going all the time. The last piece is dirty electricity. So if you have these, Lutron dimmers, and the fancy dimmers throughout your home for your lighting, or if you have photovoltaic solar panels with an inverter that's old, or you don't know about, these inverters put out what's referred to as dirty electricity. Pool pump motors. So if you have a swimming pool and it has like a newer variable speed DC motor, it puts out a lot of dirty electricity. Your neighbor's pool motor will create just as much DE on your line as it will on their line, and the next house and the next house, so on and so forth. And so the reason I bring this up is when I'm actually doing my assessments, I use an oscilloscope to where I can like I know enough now, and I'm like, okay, we got a pool pump over here. I got a power bank over a wall from the solar panel over there. I've got dimmers all over the house. I already know this house is putting out a lot of dirty electricity. I don't even need to put my meter on, right? But I can break everything down from an oscilloscope to pinpoint exactly, okay, this is exactly what it was. So if we eliminate this, or say we can eliminate that, then we can use these capacity type filters that it's a whole home filter, and it goes into the power panel, and that'll help suppress and clean up. Dirty electricity is basically it's harmonics. It's line noise, it's noise, and it travels through the electrical system of the house and the next house over, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's what dirty electricity is. And so some people are very sensitive, but there's all kinds of studies on it too, to where if you don't even have to be electrical hypersensitive too. It creates noise. It's like the flickering lights. We'll talk about lighting, but it's the flickering lights that we can't really see that are flickering, but it's stressing out the nervous system. That's what DE does. So I would say it's more of kind of like a nuisance. Yeah, it does have an effect. It's not like AC magnetics or anything like that, or constant exposure of non-ionizing radiation from RF, but it is definitely playing a role into, again, we want to build a sanctuary. We want that nature environment, right? So we want to sleep in an environment that's very calm, very quiet, very still. And if we have all this DE running through the house, it is having a direct effect. We just don't know it.
To illustrate your point, I tried I got a grounding pillowcase, and I couldn't sleep with it, but I got a nuisance current blocker and plugged it in. I know it's still not perfect. It'd be better to plug it into the ground.
Yes.
I know, but I can sleep with it. I think it's still a plus, but it was just really interesting to me that I could not sleep with a grounding mount. I'm awake. It's like I can hear the noise. My body can.
There's so much to that. Like I'm not against grounding sheets and pillows and things like that, but if you don't know your electrical system in your house, it's a total crapshoot. You're playing like Russian roulette. Like, maybe you got lucky and there's not like a lot of dirty electricity, or the grounding system, like everything's done properly. And it is truly grounding into the earth ground, through all the interference of everything else. Then or like you said, if you take that grounding mat or pillowcase or whatever, and you go directly to the ground with a rod, and you're using a long enough rod to get into the saturation of the damp soil so you're getting good grounding results.
How long does that have to be? Like I've got
just if the ground, well, like if you're up there in Portland or whatever.
I'm in Ottawa.
Is the soil pretty saturated?
It is.
I mean, it is. An 8-inch spike is enough in that case. But if we're out here in the desert, I'm kind of throwing this out here because there's all these different variables, right? If I'm out here in the desert and it hasn't rained in months on end, and I'm throwing that same 8-inch spike that you're throwing in there and then thinking I'm grounding, I'm like, hardly, it's not grounding,
Interesting. Whoa, interesting.
Yeah. Well, we should probably move to lighting. We're getting to the end here. We don't want to keep you too long.
Oh my God, sorry. I hope I'm not dragging everything out for everyone here.
No.
We're okay to stay on as long as you are.
Bless you. You have taught people so many things. You're making people think. I love it.
And we'll bring it all together here in the end, and kind of what it looks like and how I do things, and we'll just we'll put the pieces together. But
all right.
But yeah, no, from a grounding perspective, again, I'm all about grounding, but I think it's kind of irresponsible just to have all these products and you just throw them out there, and most people don't know. They don't understand. Oh yeah, you just take a little electrical tester and make sure that you don't have any false grounds or grounding issues, and open paths and stuff like that. You'll be fine. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
No,
this is exactly why I have not bought any grounding sheets or pads or blah 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 because I don't know. I need to have someone like you, Brian, come in and test and let me know that it's okay to do.
Or Laura too.
Or Laura.
Yeah, I don't have an oscilloscope. I just have like the microsurge meter, so I can see it. And to be honest, at one point we had like 1,800 GSUs. Like,
oh my!
It helped us find the source of a cheap light that was ordered from China, and we got it down to like 120. And then I used sensorizers to bring it
Yeah, the
down
sweats are
lower. So I
filtered.
feel,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel better about it, but still it's not perfect, right?
That's crazy.
I
So it was just that one source.
it was,
You
yeah,
found that one source, huh?
it was
Good for
a
you.
light my son had ordered, and it took my husband and I were with walkie-talkies going around the house, and he's like, all of a sudden, I go, "What'd you do? What'd you do?" It just dropped in the bedroom from
That's
1800.
cool. I love
Yeah,
it.
that was very cool.
It's
Yeah,
so satisfying when, we get to do these things for ourselves and, we're finding the sources and all of a sudden, boom, there it is. There's the culprit.
yeah. And
So
then I was having a bit of anxiety. I was waking up with anxiety every morning. Couldn't do my Wim Hof breathing. I couldn't meditate. I couldn't do any breathing practices. And anyway, magically all went away when we unplugged that light, which is interesting.
that filter that you have for your grounding, what was the cost of that filter?
Oh, it was probably about 350 US.
Yeah, yeah.
I just got it. Shield your body.
Yeah. I know the guy the technology that created
Uh,
that.
McAfee?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I have an important question for you, just because it's Black Friday and everybody's coming to me saying, should I buy this? Should I buy this? Is that better than a grounded wire? Because there's other people that are selling grounding sheets and mats with a special grounded wire. They're saying that it takes away the dirty electricity. My understanding is the nuisance current blocker is like a whole other level of safety.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. I know it's another piece, right? But he's solved the problem that we're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
now because you'll block it because like it even picks up, body voltage, right? Because it's coming, it's feeding back through the grounding system, right?
Right.
Along with other things too. And it stops that current. Like, because I'll even if I would say I had no dirty electricity and I still plug that in, I get good solid grounding, I don't even have an issue. You're still going to feed current, believe it or not, voltage. You'll pick up line voltage without that filter.
Mm.
That's crazy. So it's like here you went through all this work, you mitigated your home, and then you
I
threw this
know.
grounding sheet. Everything seems to be good. You're plugging it in, and then if you were to test your body voltage,
Yes.
you'd be pretty shocked if you didn't have it filtered.
Okay. Wow.
So now you're exposing yourself back to that again, but you're filtering it all out, so you're okay.
Okay. Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Made my day.
I know it's like now, your $500 sheets, you got to add another $350
I
for the
know.
filter
Well, the sheets were
or
that.
whatever.
Yeah. I think the pillowcase is the way to go because it's like, well, except for if you're two people, then that's not going to
Yeah,
work. You
exactly.
need this grounding sheet. So just
Yeah.
quickly, do we have time for lighting, Andia? What do you think?
Oh,
Yeah, I'm
lighting, my
fine.
fave.
Because we have touched a lot on lighting we had the CEO of Block Blue Light. So we know the dangers of blue light. We know there's some lighting that
Okay.
exists out there, but you
Well,
you were mentioning to us just before we went on
yeah.
live. Could you touch on that? How
Yeah,
you did
let
for
this
you?
this is perfect. So, talking about like the electrical system and value engineering and designing the electrical system and our networking, our Ethernet cables, right? So I did a lot of research on different lighting systems because I wanted to build in truly a non-EMF. This is different. This is different than the conversation that you've had because I have found, took a lot of years to find this, but I came across a company and I'm happy to share. It's called Color Beam. Color Beam.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe when I found them, and I was like, this is too good to be true. What they do is their whole lighting system, the whole infrastructure, each light is connected with an Ethernet cable. It's 100% low voltage. Okay. So
Wow.
if we have the capabilities of doing a complete renovation or we're doing a new build, we've already know about the circadian and the blue light and all these different types of things. I mean, they actually hired, it was 6 years ago, Color Beam hired a circadian biologist and actually did all these studies to say, well, if you stay between K and 5,000, that's really those, if you're starting to get into 1,600 on the low end and 6,000, 8,000 on the high end,
John Kelvin?
yeah,
Yeah.
the temperature. Thank you. Sorry, thank for that. There's the studies are between 22 to 5,000 is the benefit, is the real benefit. That's how far Color Beam went with it. They took the whole circadian aspect to a whole nother level. Okay. But that's okay. We all know that here, most of us that, watch your podcast and understand the color temperatures and
Yes.
circadian and blue light and things. Well, I couldn't believe it when I came across Color Beam. it was kind of a match made in heaven, because I'm like, oh, this is crazy. This is 100% low voltage. The switches, the dimmers, the lighting system, the lights, everything is all on a Cat 6 cable. It's 100% low voltage. So now we've eliminated all of the Romex or MC. By the way, I talked about MC cable, electrical cable for the house that suppresses and reduces. It's very expensive, over Romex. So a lot of the times when we're doing a design, even like clients that have money, when we're comparing our electrical costs from a standard Romex to like a MC cable, it's considerable, especially with copper had gone up. It's gone down just a little bit. But
So it's more shielded? Is that what the
yeah,
MC?
well, there's no current going through it anymore, right? It's not putting off anything. So now our whole infrastructure above our heads, there's no standard line voltage anymore. We're eliminating all of that. And Cat 6 cable is a lot cheaper than even Romex cable. Okay. So from a savings perspective, it's cheaper there. But from an EMF perspective, we've 100% eliminated all the EMF. Now, I've been challenged in the industry from others saying, okay, well, hey, the technology of people assume it's a switch mode power supply, which is an AC adapter. So I kind of talked on this from the dirty electricity side. Mm-hmm. So when we have all these technologies and these AC adapters, a lot of them, they use these switch mode power supplies like that light bulb you found, right? Mm-hmm. And what they do is they put out EMI, electrical magnetic interference, back into the line. Okay, this dirty electricity, right? Same thing where these power walls or these inverters for photovoltaic solar panels get bad raps, but there's good panels out there that filter. They use different sine wave, they're linear on how they transfer the power from AC to DC. So this is the key piece. Well, Color Beam used a premium AC, a linear type of an AC adapter. And then it has a DMX controller that controls the lighting systems and these color. You can do multicolor, RGB, W, and all these things, right? Well, what it does is it decouples that interference. So all of the low voltage that's feeding through the whole infrastructure, it's all completely decoupled. And so they just happen. And I've looked at all of the competitors out there. The competitors, and we're talking the high end, I won't say names, but just the high end stuff. Okay. Mm-hmm. They're using, it's all set up on a wireless infrastructure for one. I'm like, well, they missed the boat on that one.
Yeah.
And then they're using standard voltage for they're using standard voltage for to power all the lights. And then they're converting, from AC to DC within the light itself, which is putting out this dirty electricity because they're not using a quality AC adapter that converts to the DC electric. So low voltage is AC to DC. And so that's what's really fascinating about Color Beam lighting system. So it's taken lighting to a whole different level. And again, we don't have to get into all the other circadian aspects, but from an electrical standpoint, and it gets into like home integration, which we kind of talked about. What home integration is, it's using IT low voltage as an infrastructure for telecommunications, for, all the different router systems and, the infrastructure of the house, of hardwiring the house. So imagine that now the lighting becomes part of that infrastructure. So it all kind of ties together. Using Color Beam is the only manufacturer like it in the industry. And they admitted that they just wanted a high quality product early on. And it wasn't like they were doing it they had no idea they were doing it from a low EMF perspective. They were just doing it because they wanted all their IT guys, because they were used to pulling like cat cables for, routers and communications and things like that. They're like, well, why wouldn't we just make our lights low voltage, and then we'll just use good quality inverters and GMX controllers and things like that. So they hit a home run without even knowing that they did it in the EMF world. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thanks for that resource.
Not a lot of people understand that. So that's a big takeaway for the lighting for anybody that wants to design circadian EMF free lighting.
Okay.
What have we missed? Water? Did we talk water at all?
Oh, water. Yeah. We'll just okay. water's my favorite. Also structuring, a lot of people talk about structuring and, what is structuring, and I'm sure you guys have, talked to, several about, structuring. So we won't go too far in there other than I love it because, it's bringing coherence and how the water communicates and being in resonance with our bodies. And I came across a company 4 years ago, Natural Actions, and they have a structuring device. And my goal of building a home is, part of the water filtration is like, if I go bathe, if I go turn on a faucet, I go to brush my teeth, I want to be able to turn on the faucet and have like structured, ultra filtered water. Why does it have to be under the sink, right? I want a part of everything. Like I want to bathe in it, of course, right? Yeah. So when I approached them, they were doing big industrial systems, but not home systems. And so I actually helped them launch a full line of ultrafiltration for homes. So structuring is one aspect. So that's one part of the puzzle, but then there's filtering, right? And filtering is kind of its own world, because you have to understand there's the flow ability. So we have plumbing, we have whatever the size of the main line coming into the home, how much pressure, how many gallons per minute of flow based upon the size of the home. So that's why it's easy to do under sink filtration, because they can do like, a mini RO, reverse osmosis, which I'm a fan of, for very specific things. But anyways, they don't have high flow for under the sink, right? That's because it restricts the flow, because they're reducing down through the filtration, down to submicron level, right? And all particles. So you lose that flow ability. Well, when you work with the engineering aspect of larger filtration, the type of filtration, we can take out, all the inorganics, all the organics, and, microplastics and VOCs and heavy metals and disinfectants and, and all these different types of things that are in the water table, right? And so they addressed it. And Natural Actions proactively works with clients using like Simple Labs. It's a water testing laboratory. Send out a water test, whether you're on a city or a well, test the water, see what's in the water, because there's two parts of a water test. You have the profile, which is the hardness, the TDS, the alkalinity, like of what the water is. But then you have the chemical side of everything, like what's the disinfectants and fluorides and, what's heavy metals and microplastics, all these different types of things, right? So it's kind of like a two-part test. So one is we want to know what water quality we're working with, as far as like the hardness. Is the pH too low? Is it too high? Right? Is the TDS off the charts? All these different types of factors. So it's like understanding these pieces and then working with filtration that is going to have a high flow to allow the water to be filtered, whatever the test results come back and whatever Natural Actions is working with. So then we're filtering that out at a high flow capacity, even at, a 10,000, I'll just use 10,000 square foot home, then to be able to have a filtration system that's structuring that water through that entire home. And that's something that they've answered and there's a solution for.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I know I kind of crunched all that down and we're short on time, but I hope that kind of covered everything.
You have an amazing, I want people to know you have an amazing Instagram, and you go like when you're in a house, like you'll do a little video on what you're doing and you explain it so beautifully. And I remember watching one of your videos and you were talking about Laundry Pro 2.0.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I haven't got it yet, but it's on my wish list as an upgrade for the house. You're so knowledgeable when it comes to all these areas. It's amazing. Now we want you to talk about Synergy 360 a little bit before we close. Your company, the services you provide, so people know how to contact you and all that. However you want to frame all that.
Thank you. Yeah. So Synergy 360. So all this talked about over this last hour seems like hour and a half. I'm not sure how long it's been, but hopefully not too long for everyone. But so Synergy is so synergistically, it's working with all the building materials, right? And then it's working with them to where they all integrate synergistically 360 degrees and taking a 360 degree holistic approach. And so that's really, Synergy 360 was born 5 years ago. So again, it's taken all that knowledge, all the history, right? And then putting that together and then actually building the homes and taking this full holistic approach into everything. But source energy, I just said it. So synergy stands for even more source energy, right? And it's understanding everything on such on a quantum level, right? Because there was a lot of inspiration that fueled that. And I spent a lot of time not only studying and building and learning and all the wisdoms, but really, taking things into like meditation and things like that to really, look for answers. And when you're in alignment, everything just comes to you. And so that's really what a lot of that logo means. But it's really specific around the knowledge of healthy home building. And so I constantly get these like downloads of information. Things will just open up, connections. It's just not me, right? So Synergy 360 is a partnership of all of us, right? This big collective of all, like what you ladies are doing in your industry and, and what I'm doing in my industry, but we're all like headed towards like this goal of just health, right? And, so my aspect is creating these healthy building sanctuaries, but beyond even like, the knowledge of the building biology. And I highly recommend, even if you take the 101 super simple course of building biology, kind of gives you the basics and the fundamentals of all the principles. Mm-hmm. But also too, is I've met like so many engineers that are like highly skilled of what they do specifically, like in, in the EMF world or the water world or, the air quality, world. And it's just opened up this relationship. And so it's like, I feel like I've been in alignment and flow to like all the people will come in to where, like I don't claim to have all the answers, but I definitely claim to have a direction of creating what we're doing here to where, when you're in alignment with something, everything just lines up and people show up and everything just starts to create itself. And so Synergy 360 is just, it's a collective, right? It's just more than me, so I have like a huge resource in moving forward. And I'll share about the assessments and kind of what I actually do with Synergy 360, but also too advancing. I've created called the Healthy Builders Alliance. And this is going to be huge. This is like the next thing. And it's to train architects, builders, trades, interior designers, professionals in the industry that are actually part of building homes, is to create the awareness of, building, can we make this the new norm? And it's quite like in our world, it seems to be big, but then when we get back out there, we find out, people are like, say, what? Like, what are you doing? And so how do we make it practical? Right. And so that's what I'm doing. And also too, the Alliance is also, I'm looking for like environmental doctors and functional medicine, environmental specialists, building materials. So we're creating this huge collective of this resource across the country. So if somebody wants to find a contractor that understands, like using the methods and the specifications that we just discussed in this whole podcast, you can find somebody right there in Portland, Oregon, or, in Canada, so definitely working on the big goal of putting that together. But what I do is Synergy 360s, so I'm a general contractor. I'm not proactively building only because I'm so busy now managing projects. So what I do is I manage projects, construction management, but from a healthy perspective, working directly for the client more as kind of like the client owner's rep kind of in a case. But it's a little bit different because I'm bringing in the skills and the knowledge as a builder. But what I do is I bring in design specifications with architects and then educating the builders, working with a general contractor that's open, training the contractor, training all the trades through the whole process. And so when we're designing the home, it's all part of the design package, right? So we're clear on, we're building an EMF free zone. We're building premium air quality. We're doing good, structure and design, water filtration, everything that we just discussed. It's so clear. It's a blueprint. It's an outline in the beginning. It makes the construction process so much easier because everybody's intention and everybody's goal is really clear of what they're creating. So right now I'm proactively, working on managing these projects all over the country right now. I have a lot of projects going, and it's working out beautifully. And also too, I do assessments. So I do these healthy home assessments, and it's a home assessment on steroids. It's not even the same category like for like a real estate transaction or something like that, right? This is for me to come in there to evaluate the home. It's very comprehensive. It goes all the way from the roof, all the way down the walls, to the windows, to the foundations, and to the grade, and to the home, and to all the building materials, and to, the external environment. What are we facing on the internal environment? What's the history? Getting into kind of like the mold and all those types of things. And then, but the building structure and how it's performing, water testing, EMF testing, all the air testing, and then putting together a very comprehensive program and kind of a blueprint or an outline, if you will, for the client of like, hey, all right, now I'm empowered. Now I understand these are the things that I could do moving forward to turn this into like a healthy home and a healthy building sanctuary. So the assessments are obviously for like existing, structures. So I'm involved in a lot of renovations as well, but the renovations is based on doing the assessment, so we know what we're working with.
Right. Yeah. Awesome.
Would that take a couple days?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. So about a 2,500 square foot home takes about a day, but I usually every circumstance is different. Right. Like every home I look at, there's something very unique to it, and so I like to give myself a lot of time. So yeah, 2 days up to a pretty good size home is typical. Yeah. And I'll go out and I'll fly out to the location and again, work with the client, the goals, understanding as much as the history as possible of the building, and then just starting the assessment from there.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you for sharing all that. You are a wealth of knowledge. So we want to ask you our signature question. We're going to put a twist on it here. So what does a quantum healthy home mean to you? How would you summarize that to bring everything together?
Oh my goodness. It was cool because I was kind of talking about like synergy and kind of like the intention of what I'm doing. And for me, a quantum home, there was one piece that we kind of left out, but I'm going to kind of tie this in and keep this kind of short. But people talk about like harmonizers. We didn't talk about this, and this is a big topic. I mean, you're wearing a biogeometry pendant, which is like harmonizing your biofields and all these different types of things, right? So it's so intentional, and of course there's more behind it. But for me, I work with other technologies too, like LilaQ, the quantum upgrade. I don't know if you've guys,
yep.
Right?
I have a cosmic tower.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. So
yeah.
For me, like, I would never rely on a harmonizer as like just a standalone. Like I wouldn't live in a moldy home. I wouldn't live in a home full of EMFs and just because it's harmonized, like I would always like address, however, if we don't have access to these types of things, what's the first thing and the most inexpensive thing that I would do? It would be to invest in, I love LilaQ and their quantum upgrade. I think it's really cool, but there's other devices and things out there and technologies. The reason why I bring that piece in is because they're using quantum energy, right? Mm-hmm. And there's just so much behind that. And I think if we're very intentional of, really connected to, the higher level consciousness and all these different types of things, right? We're doing our work. It's mind, body, soul, right? Like, and so there's this whole quantum piece of being connected, not being in fear. And like this whole conversation that we've had, this is definitely the intention is just to build awareness and not to build fear of anything. And so for me, it's bringing in the intention of like, hey, like I'm educated and I know that I can't do this right now, but you know what? I'm going to harmonize myself and I'm going to bring all this intention and I'm going to do my work. And, and when we're designing and building a home, for me, what a quantum home would look like is bringing all that intention, right? Like when I'm building a home, like it's so intentional. The contractors, the trades, like I want everybody to understand what role are they doing? They're not just there hooking up wires, pulling pipe. They're there intentionally because they're building this beautiful home, and they get to be part of something and educate themselves. And so it's very intentional. So for me, there's a lot of intention into building a home. And when we bring that intention to, again, using all these different modalities as well, that would be, I know that was a long explanation, but I think it just goes beyond, right? And what a quantum home, there's, I think, intention, the drive, the purpose, and the intention of what we're doing. And yeah, and everybody that we bring and being in alignment, and things just show up and they happen.
Yeah. Awesome.
Brian, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said awesome.
Awesome. Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Awesome. Again, ditto. I'll just bring something together that you may not know, Brian, but Wish Saeed, an interior designer from New York, a fashion designer. We've had her twice on the podcast. I think that's why you're here.
I love my Wish. She's awesome.
Yes. Oh, isn't she something? And she's all about intention.
Yes.
And yeah, her book, in terms of entering a cancer journey with this intention of beauty, grace, and alignment. And so anyway, first of all, thank you to Mawish, if you're listening, for bringing Brian on. But we want to thank you for a number of things. But first of all, just to say, your journey from lumber to concrete to triathlons, and I don't know if we said it at the beginning, but you're like elite level. I've done some triathlons, and I mean, you're my hero for what you've done with triathlons. So, and just that bringing you into this health journey and biohacking, and which is so cool that it took your own fitness and athleticism to then bring you to question, what about this environment that I live in? And anyway, and sorry that you had to go through the brain fog. I've experienced a bit of that too. So hear you on that one. But thank you for all that, your journey to bring you to quantum biology and functional medicine. But it's so beautiful to see you pull all of this together. I know people that do I do home assessments just for EMFs, and it takes me half a day just to look at this, and the fact that you have the knowledge to look at all these pieces. So thank you for synergistically, holistically, doing this with this 360 approach, and really to find this blueprint of the healthiest home. And now to take it to we just at the very end of this interview, you're telling us now you've created this Healthy Home Alliance, and that you're not only coaching, but you're bringing this to the building industry. Like, what a gift. Talk about intention. So thank you so much for being you, and for everything you've done, and how you're going to change homes, because we'll just finish it all. Like, we talk, Andy and I are coaching clients, and we talk all day about changing your environment, and you can't get well in the same environment you got sick. And wow, what is so interesting to see how you're doing this and changing lives and the planet. Really, it's a bigger thing, right?
Well, thank you for seeing that. Yeah, the numbers are growing, and thanks to you and for you ladies for having me on to bring out what I'm doing, to help educate, because hopefully other contractors, other professionals in the building industry, they watch this and they're intrigued, and they reach out to me. And by the way, anyone could, reach out, obviously, share how you found me in the podcast. But Synergy, spelled with an E, SENERGY 360.com. And then of course I'm on Instagram at Synergy 360 as well. So I'm happy to answer questions. So please, everyone, bring your questions to the table. I mean, that's how I learn, right? That's how we all learn. I learn a lot from my clients. They have the knowledge, but they're just not sure, or maybe they stumbled upon it. They're on the right path. They just don't know. And then I come in, I'm like, oh yeah, totally. It's exactly what, and then it's just great. I don't work because, I just love what I do. So I look at Synergy 360 and everything that I do as definitely passion work. So yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
Awesome. Well, we can tell you're very passionate.
And keep playing.
Yes.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakismanwellness.com and Andia at andiaray.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.